From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. In Venezuela, the Angostura 2019 military exercises have begun. They mark 200 years since the Congress of Angostura, convened by Simón Bolívar during the Wars of Independence of Colombia and Venezuela. They aim to test the operational and technical capabilities of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. These exercises will be held until February 15 and involve more than 2 million military and militia troops. They're being supervised by President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Nicolás Maduro.
Our people and our Bolivarian armed forces are monitoring and defending our territory. They have been deployed across our homeland to protect it. I call upon the Venezuelan people and the youth to join this plan for national defense, sovereignty and peace. Today, the most important military exercises that our history records, the most important in the context we live in, have been successfully launched throughout the national territory. A real threat, the imperialist Donald Trump's government against the peace of Venezuela. We have been threatened by the head of the empire, and that has provoked outrage, rejection by all the people of Venezuela and the public opinion worldwide, and forces us to prepare to defend the right to peace for our country, to defend the dignity of Venezuela, its sovereignty, its independence, to defend the right to live in the 21st century as a free, sovereign nation.
Venezuela's Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino López has insisted on the government's call for dialogue.
A military intervention means destruction, death, the loss of lives. That is the worst threat, the military intervention. What we are asking is for Venezuela's sovereignty to be respected as it should be for any country, to solve conflicts in a peaceful way, under the people's right to self-determination. We hope dialogue is the final step, with an open agenda, so we can solve the political crisis that has been imposed on Venezuela.
Also, an army commander highlighted the historic importance of the upcoming bicentennial military exercise.
With this military exercise, we remember our history. We especially remember our liberator Simón Bolívar, who freed us 200 years ago in Angostura. This is the best way we can honor him, our chief in command and President Nicolás Maduro, who was elected democratically and freely. We deploy all of our military forces at the national level.
Venezuelans all over the country have been signing a document condemning U.S. imperialism in Latin America. U.S. journalist Max Blumenthal was in Caracas to see it firsthand on Sunday.
Okay, so we're here in Simón Bolívar Square in Caracas, and people are lining up for blocks and blocks to sign a declaration against American imperialism, against American intervention, calling on the U.S. not to intervene and to allow Venezuela to remain in peace. The lines are massive here, and the government is seeking to get 10 million signatures, and you can see just how long the lines are. They're stretching around the block. They're going all the way back here, all the way around this block, and they're filling up the square. And people have been coming all day and will be coming all afternoon to sign this declaration.
Let's look at more on this project taking place in Caracas.
Hands off Venezuela is the message coming from those who have lined up. The signing of the people can be seen as a sort of defense against external threats and the coup which has been promoted by the opposition.
I believe this gentleman has no country. He would sell his homeland and is not able to open his eyes to see that here there's a people who would give their lives in order to defend our homeland against imperialism. That's why we are signing.
But the threats of the military intervention don't only come from the U.S. The self-proclaimed right-wing lawmaker, Juan Guaido, has not discarded any option.
We will once again do whatever is possible. This is a very controversial issue, but we will use our sovereignty and our competency to do whatever is required.
The calls for peace and respect for sovereignty continue. Meanwhile, the strategy of delivering humanitarian aid is being used by the US and its allies to attack Venezuela in an attempt to topple President Nicolás Maduro.
They have totally failed in imposing a dictatorship in Venezuela. Our people are in the streets to defend our constitution, our democracy. The coup won't succeed. The interference attempt won't succeed, and we will not accept any handout from the empire under the false pretense of a humanitarian crisis.
The policy promoted by Washington is not new. It's been promoting an economic war against Venezuela for years.
In the last 2 or 3 years, they have stolen more than $60 billion, and now they are supposedly bringing humanitarian aid. This is just a Trojan horse or supposed humanitarian aid. What we say is hands off Venezuela and stop the economic crimes and the economic blockade against Venezuela.
Many think that it is ironic that the White House promises aid worth $20 million for Venezuela, while at the same time blocking Venezuelan assets worth over $20 billion.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has commented on the so-called humanitarian aid for Venezuela. He said it should be available to all countries that need it without any political interest behind it.
I'm in favor of humanitarian aid, not only to Venezuela but also to Haiti and to all poor and abandoned countries, to millions of Mexicans who suffer from hunger, millions of human beings in the world who suffer from hunger. I am in favor of humanitarian aid. However, I consider that it should not be mixed with any political interests.
The Southern African Development Community has expressed solidarity with Venezuela and condemned attempts by some countries to interfere in its internal affairs. In a statement, the chairperson of the SADC, President of Namibia, Hage Geingob, emphasized the need to respect the democratically elected government led by President Nicolás Maduro. He adds that supporting the self-proclamation of Juan Guaidó as interim president is supporting a coup. Dozens of people are protesting outside the U.S. Embassy in South Africa against the government's support for a coup in Venezuela. The protesters are from different political, workers and social movements, including the ruling African National Congress and its alliance partner, the South African Communist Party. They are demanding an immediate end to the undermining of Venezuela's sovereignty. This follows pickets which were held on Friday at the U.S. consulate in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. The African Union Summit continues in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Our correspondent Matuba Matlaji has the details.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was among leaders attending the African Union 32nd Ordinary Session, and he's optimistic that conflicts around the continent will be resolved, and the UN would be willing to support governments in reducing or even eradicating unrest, chaotic scenes that we've seen over the recent past. The UN chief also gave a press briefing in Addis Ababa saying Africa should not only be seen as a continent riddled with problems, but he outlined opportunities and potential that Africa has, and he's praised African governments for their solidarity in dealing with migration and opening their borders to refugees, especially those displaced by conflicts. And Guterres has highlighted a misconception that more Africans are migrating to European countries. It's in fact quite the opposite. Internal migration of Africans is much higher, and Africans account for about 8% of people migrating to Europe. Now, with Egypt at the helm of the AU, President al-Sisi will have to hit that ground running, in a bid to change perceptions about Africa and certainly change reality of many Africans displaced by conflict. Now, Egypt has until next year to complete its mandate before South Africa takes over as chair. And the mandate will definitely include relations with other countries outside of Africa. Speaking of other countries outside of Africa, Venezuela came into the spotlight at the AU summit held in Addis. President Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine telling African leaders there in Ethiopia that he rejected the regime change attempt by the United States. It's back to studio.
That was Matuba Matlaji from Addis Ababa. And we have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
vacation to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives, Friday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. 4 Salvadorian migrants were detained while trying to cross the U.S.-Mexican border. They tried to swim across the Rio Grande River from Piedras Negras in Mexico to Eagle Pass in Texas, but they were chased by U.S. Border Patrol. Around 2,000 Central American migrants are awaiting on the Mexican side of the border, while some are considering working in Mexico.
We were ready to cross. We just needed 5 minutes. But then migration officers came and we had to cross back. We had to cross the river in freezing water. It's tough. I plan to go back to my country. It's really hard to get over there, to cross. There were a lot of migration officers.
And other migrant caravan members are still at the border between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, waiting to enter the U.S. And U.S. demonstrators have formed a human chain at the security barrier to call for the construction of a border wall. President Donald Trump is expected to visit El Paso on Monday to hold a rally. Organizations such as Women's March and the Border Network for Human Rights have called for mobilizations in rejection of the presidential visit. Now to Chile, where at least 6 people have been killed due to floodings. Nearly 2,000 houses have been affected and almost 300 citizens have been relocated to shelters. Some villages in the northern provinces have also been isolated since the rain has washed out several roads. And heavy rains also killed at least 11 people and destroyed entire neighborhoods in Peru in the southern Arequipa region. Rescue operations are being held to find survivors who could still be inside their vehicles. Days after the environmental tragedy at the Hidroituango Dam in the Colombian department of Antioquia, local communities are demanding the project to be dismantled. They say it's a plan that has brought violence, displacement, and hunger to the region.
Medellín's public services company decided to close gates 1 and 2 of the Hidroituango Dam, located in the Antioquia department of Colombia. The decision blocked the country's second most important river, the Cauca. And hours after, the ecocide became evident to the river communities, who were powerless to do anything about it.
They kill the river with total impunity in the name of the communities. Our whole life has been centered around the river, and to us it's ironic that they justify closing of the gates. They only care about advancing, and don't care about people, fish, or wildlife.
Before closing the gates, the Medellín Public Services Company assured that they would have a contingency plan in place before the death of river life. But this is yet to be seen anywhere. Local fishermen have reported that the Medellín Public Services Company tried to hide the situation.
Now, with the Hidroituango situation, look at the Cauca River. It looks like a pipe. Many years ago, the river had a big flow, and as you can see, it's a pipe now. There are no fish. Hidroituango has affected us with this dam, and our family is starving because the boat doesn't have fish all night, and we haven't caught anything.
Geologists have pointed out that this damming of the Cauca River and its environmental impact can't be undone.
When the river channel dried up, the meadow filled the space, and at higher points the humidity has been reduced, which previously supported the wildlife, so there's a drought. When they pour in water and the river begins to flow again, it will take all of the sediments and create a lot of turbulence, which will change the conditions for the fish and microorganisms that live in the river.
The communities are not only facing an environmental tragedy, but also a possible collapse of the dam, of which engineers and geologists have denounced several times.
They didn't close the gates out of goodwill. It was about risks. If the pressure breaks, water will flow into the room where the machines are, and it wouldn't just be fish that die, but humans as well.
The hypothesis that experts have is growing stronger. Following a letter sent by the Ituango conglomerate to the Medellin Public Services Company, warning of a possible failure of the dam. Despite all the complaints from fishermen, social organizations, engineers and geologists, the Public Services Company of Medellin insists on finishing the dam. Meanwhile, the people who live around the Cauca River demand that President Ivan Duque visits the area and takes responsibility for this environmental ecocide.
Women took to the streets in Costa Rica on Saturday to protest against former President Oscar Arias. They are demanding that he be brought to justice after several cases of sexual misconduct came to light. And now another woman has formally accused Arias of sexual assault. The Nobel Peace Prize winner denies the accusations.
This march, this movement, is to demand that there is no impunity for Oscar Arias following the cases that have reported him for rape and harassment in recent days. Oscar Arias has to go to court immediately to account for what he did. We know that there are not 5, not 2, not 10 cases. There are many because we know them.
Hundreds of protesters turned out in the Haitian capital Port-au-Prince on Sunday for a 4th day of demonstrations. They're demanding the resignation of President Jovenel Moïse. The protest comes as the international community calls on Haiti's politicians to enter dialogue over the crisis. A 14-year-old boy was killed and another young man was wounded at a protest in central Port-au-Prince on Saturday. Haitians are infuriated over what they say is economic mismanagement. And after 2 years of protests, Brazilian unions defeated the pension reform proposed by former President Michel Temer. But now there's a new reform in sight. Let's listen to our correspondent Brian Mir with the details.
After 2 years of street protests, strikes, community meetings and pressure on lawmakers, the Brazilian unions defeated illegitimate President Michel Temer's pension reform proposal. Now Finance Minister Paulo Guedes has a new proposal which will cut minimum benefits in half and require 40 years of contribution. In São Bernardo, an industrial suburb of São Paulo, ABC Metal Workers Union President Wagner Santana explains what these reforms would mean for Brazilian workers.
The Brazilian worker makes pension contributions on average 9 months per year. It would take 53 years for them to make 40 effective years of contributions, which removes the possibility of people to retire.
In front of an auto plant in São Bernardo, workers express their worries about the new proposal and talk about what needs to be done to stop it.
If this goes through, unfortunately, it would lead to discrimination against the elderly.
If we are going to unite in the struggle against this, we have to go beyond the factories and bring this debate to society so that everyone can get involved in the important fight against these reforms.
Back in the Metallurgical Workers Union headquarters, where Lula began his career, Wagner Santana explains how Brazilian unions and social movements plan to fight these reforms.
We are holding a General Assembly of the working class on February 20th, here in Sao Paulo. And from there, if necessary, we will call a general strike and paralyze the factories against the pension reforms. We will do it.
Brian Mir, Telesur, São Bernardo.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. On Saturday, nearly 50 social organizations marched against the border wall in Ceuta, which separates the Spanish city from Morocco. Let's take a look.
Over the weekend, citizens once again marched against the European Union's border policies, asking the Spanish government to respect human rights and put an end to illegal deportation.
We are here to give a voice to the voiceless who couldn't come. It's a moment in which we are seeing the rise of hate speech, and it's more necessary than ever to demonstrate and say no to Europe's deadly policies.
Migrants trapped in the border city of Ceuta marched and denounced the continuing discrimination they face on their journey to Europe.
We're reclaiming freedom, the freedom to migrate to Ceuta. We want them to open the borders, so others like us can pass too. We're asking for freedom for Africa. We want freedom and equality for everyone.
The Spanish government's U-turn is complete. Pedro Sanchez's administration began by welcoming refugees on board the Aquarius, and now blocks humanitarian ships. And that has created the indignation behind today's march.
We denounce the politics behind the need to close the borders and the government's attitude that is allowing people to continue to die in the sea, whilst they do nothing.
On February 6, 2014, at least 15 migrants died at this border, where once again, people are asking for justice and reparations for the victims of European border policies. Many collectives have marched against Fortress Europe, asking the Spanish government to respect human rights in their migration policies, which cost the lives of more than 1,000 in Spain in 2018.
In other news, Israeli settlers have attacked a Palestinian school on the outskirts of the West Bank's occupied city of Nablus. A member of the village council said that a number of children had been injured following this attack by illegal settlers. A Palestinian organization launched a campaign on Sunday to accompany school children around Israeli checkpoints. They document human rights violations in the West Bank, now in the city of Hebron. It follows Israel's decision to remove a UN-backed observer mission set up in the area. The campaign filmed and photographed children's commute to school and distributed gifts as they were attacked by Jewish settlers in the area. Hungarian citizens gathered outside the presidential palace to protest against Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Budapest. While the Prime Minister gave his annual State of the Nation speech at the palace, demonstrators gathered outside and across the city to protest against his administration. Orban made Hungary's demographic decline the center of his speech. He said women with 4 or more children won't pay income tax and that growing families are better than letting Muslim immigrants enter the country.
From outside it looks that the liberal democracy that Viktor Orban is proposing is not a good thing. It's not good for Europe, it is not good for Hungary, and it's not good for everyday Hungarians.
The life and legacy of South Africa's first black president, Nelson Mandela, has been celebrated at an exhibition in London. It shows Mandela's life, including his upbringing in rural Eastern Cape, his 27-year incarceration, and the end of apartheid when he became president in 1994. Mandela died in 2013, aged 95. London is the first city to host the touring show titled Mandela, the official exhibition, before it is permanently mounted in Mandela's birthplace in South Africa.
In his presidential years, he wore a watch, a Philip Patek watch, And I've made that watch available because he gave me that watch, and I think he was such a committed person, and always on time, and always held up time, and he was never late for any commitment. Even when he traveled abroad, his watch remained on South African time, which we found hilarious as a family. But that watch is also here on display.
Hundreds of thousands of Iranians have poured onto the streets of Tehran and other cities across the country. They are marking 40 years of the Islamic Revolution. 4 decades ago, the country was declared an Islamic Republic after the Western-backed government of Shah Mohammad Reza resigned. This followed the surrender of the Iranian army to the revolutionaries. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories from our website at telesurenglish.net. And we're on social media as well, so go ahead and follow us. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.